Hello and welcome. This is a segment from the Metropolitan Wilmington Urban League Young Professionals, hosted and sponsored by Detv. My name is Kaylin Pride. I am a senior majoring in mass communications with a concentration in digital media from Delaware State University, and I will be hosting today's segment. Here with us, we have Winona Sutton and Shane Cannon, from young professionals from the Metropolitan Wilmington Urban League. And today we're just going to talk about the importance of voting. It's very important. Upcoming elections, they're happening. We're less than a week away. It's the final countdown. So these two individuals are going to help us talk about the importance of voting and why people of Delaware should get out and go vote. So without further ado, let's begin. Winona, could you please introduce yourself and tell me a little bit in our audience about yourself?
Hey, how you guys doing? Thank you, DETV, for your sponsorship, and thank you for allowing us this platform to talk about voting today. Again, my name is Winona Sutton. I am a Metropolitan Wilmington Urban League Young Professional. I served as a former social chair for the Young Professionals, and I was also a former vice president for the Young Professionals. I am currently the owner of a little boutique organization, Gaze Promo. I am a marketing communications professional, and I've worked in the nonprofit sector for so many years as a marketing communications professional. I am currently very, very passionate about voting. I do understand and know the effects of change that can be enacted through the voting process. So that's why I'm here today, to just share my passion with you guys.
Shane?
Hello. Yes, thank you for having me. My name is Shane Cannon. I am a supervisor of social workers for the state of Delaware. I have been a part of the Metropolitan Wilmington Urban League Young Professionals for about 6 years altogether. I have been chair of the Civic Engagement Committee for 2 terms, and I am now a current general member. I have lived in all counties of Delaware, so I've seen issues from many different perspectives, and I have love advocacy and really fighting for what I consider to be the little guy or the little person that has a small voice in rooms that can seem so big. So I think that's where really I think about when it comes to voting. People think it's just so much bigger than them, that what can they do, when they realize that they are the people with all the power, so they can do a lot.
That's great. That's great. So, of course, we are all actually young professionals from the Metropolitan Wilmington Urban League, but our viewers are probably like, what's that? So Winona, can you give us a bit more information about who we are and what we do?
Sure. So the Urban League Young Professionals, just to give you a little bit of background, a little bit of history. So the Urban League is actually a national organization. We have chapters all across the United States. There are statewide organizations, but there are also the auxiliary groups, which are our young professionals, our guild, which is for members who support the financial, raising money and really supporting us in a financial way. But the young professionals are the ones who sort of put our feet to the ground. We go into the communities, we bring different programs such as arts and culture, education, civic engagement. We also are very focused on community service. So that's just a really great way just to get the young professionals active, engaged civically, and sort of just in the community. So we are a huge staple all around this country, but definitely in the Metropolitan Wilmington area.
That's great. That's great. So let's get into it. You guys talked about voting a little bit briefly within your introductions. Can you tell us just the importance of why people should vote in the first place?
Sure, I'll take that first. People should vote because it really affects everything around us. I think we think about the big headliners like the presidential election. However, elections are really a local thing. That's where it really matters the most. The people that make decisions that affect your everyday life, the people that are in those positions are determined by votes. So we have to think about and learn and take the time to learn that we are voting for a purpose and find our purpose to voting, and also make sure it's for a specific reason, and that's where we can focus our education on that specific reason to find out when to vote, who we're voting for, and why we're voting.
And just to piggyback off of what Shane said, I think that is so important, right? Um, just something as small as a stoplight in your community, right? Most individuals really don't know how to get it fixed. They don't know how to get a speed bump. They don't know how those things that truly affect us, our day to day, how to get them repaired or fixed or changed. We do see these huge elections, and we see these combative town halls, and we see these combative, you know, interactions between our presidents and our vice presidents and former vice president. But none of that really does anything for us on our local level, right? And so the importance behind voting is getting those changes in your community, those immediate changes in your community. That's the importance of voting. Knowing who to, who's responsible for some of those things in your community is why voting is so important, right? Because during the voting process, you sort of get to know the candidates. You get to know what they do, how they do it. You actually, in some cases, can become friends with them, find out where they are, how to get in touch with them. And it really is helpful because it is the way that you're going to enact change in your community.
Yeah, you both just talked about, the importance of voting and especially voting locally. That's extremely important. And Shane, you just said, there's a purpose to voting. And my question for you is, what are some issues that we face possibly in our community that people should really take into account when it comes to our upcoming elections?
Okay, thank you for bringing that up. So the issues, when I think of Delaware, I think of issues. I think the number one issue I think of is inequality in education. So that is in all levels, but especially in the public education. Like we touched on a little bit even right now talking about voting, is that education is definitely needed in all areas. It's voting, but in general. And we have to look at how Delaware uses the voting, uses the education system, how it uses the funding, because Delaware is near the top in the country of how much money it puts towards education, but we're near the bottom when it comes to how that turns out to how our children are performing in these schools. So why is that happening? There was recently a big court decision that we do need to redo our educational system for the funding. However, it's the legislators that are going to have to determine the plan. The courts can't make the state determine a plan. So it's who we put in Dover is going to make a big decision as to what the education is going to look like for our children and for our children's children. So I think that's a big thing because that affects the whole state. I will also say, especially speaking of Wilmington, this is probably a no-brainer, but public safety is definitely a concern that has to be in the forefront of everybody's mind. But also, you have to think about who's in control of providing that public safety. So if it's a city, then you have to look at the mayor, because that like Wilmington has a city council. However, the city council does not control the police and does not control public safety. That would be the administration of the mayor, for example. So you just have to dig deeper and realize which part can affect the change you want to see. So everybody can think of one issue that they see every day. Find that issue, find out who can change it, and that's your reason to vote.
I love what you just talked about. You did talk about lack of education, and I think I often see that within our youth, and I feel as though that's a very significant reason on why we see higher rates of less youth voting within the elections. And Winona, could you elaborate a bit more on what you think, or why do you think, there are less young people going to the polls?
Education. I think the miseducation of our young voters. A lot of people are just a little bit fearful of the unknown. They don't know what the process looks like. It's not something we learn in school. I mean, we learn inferential statistics, but we don't really learn about how to vote. We go to the DMV and they give us our voting registration rights, So it's pretty interesting that the amount of people who actually fear the process. We are also not as proactive in becoming educated about who our candidates are and what it looks like on a local level. For instance, even leading up to the elections, but definitely even outside of election years, there are a lot of community events, a lot of roundtables, a lot of talks, a lot of panels where community leaders speak to us And a lot of times when we're not engaged, we just don't know. We don't know how to find the information. We don't know how to follow it. Just a couple of days ago, I was on I actually attended a panel hosted by some of the sororities in our local area, where it was a women who lead panel, and it had some of the already elected officials and some of the officials who are currently on the ballot that we will be voting on November 3rd. And one of the topics of conversation that came up was defunding the police. And one of the great, beautiful women, she is currently part of our member of our House of Representatives. She represents the 3rd District for Delaware, and her name is Sherry Dorsey Walker. She's amazing. But she spoke about just even sponsoring and being one of the people who can be a catalyst to start that conversation in order for us to make change in the future. What does that look like? You know what I'm saying? So just the importance of women who look like us, the importance of being educated by those women who look like us, and men who look like us, who are younger, who are older, but just overall who have our best interests at heart. A lot of people don't have faith in that system. So I think that is somewhat, education for the youth, and them being able to see and hear from those representatives and really learning from them is what's going to push them to become voters in the future.
And I have a question for both of you that actually just popped in my head. You just talked about there are a lot of forums and panels and whatnot happening in our community, but what about those people who don't have access to, being able to go to these types of places or events and whatnot, especially during COVID-19? What advice would you give to all people to educate themselves on, who we are voting for and how to vote and everything else that goes along with the voting process?
I'm going to steal this one real quick, Shane. I'm going to say Google is your friend.
Okay.
Google is your friend. Ballotpedia is actually a resource as well that you can go on and you can find out who is on your ballots in your state, in your city, in your district. But Google is a great friend of mine. I had a friend call me, and he was unsure about how to vote. He didn't know what to do. And with the election coming in a few days, I was, a little concerned for him, but I'm like, we're going to figure it out. We're going to figure this out. I'm a huge believer of having your voting plan and sort of figuring, mapping that process out before you get to the polls. But what I did for him as I Googled the word vote. And when I Googled the word vote, I actually found a page that gave me like a drop-down menu where I can go to each individual state respectively. And then when you go to that state, it actually gives you a link to check your status to figure out if you are already registered. You may have moved since you initially registered, but just going through the process of looking, finding out for yourself. Trust me, Google is going to be your friend. But there are other resources, and you can always feel free to reach out to a young professional group like us, Urban League Young Professional. So that's also just a better way for you to go about it.
Jane?
What a great answer, Winona. I would say you can also, speaking of Delaware specifically, is look for phone numbers of contacting your election office for your county. There is one in each county, so they could definitely give you all the information as far as local politics, where to vote, if you're registered to vote, because definitely you don't want to guess that you're registered to vote. You need to know that you're registered to vote so you don't have any issues on election day. So though all that necessary steps and check the boxes, those are all can be done locally, as well as using the internet and talking to people that you trust. Winona talked about it earlier, that we just don't talk about voting enough just in general. So having those conversations with friends, hey, what are you doing for election day? Are you voting? Because it doesn't need to be a secret that you're voting. I do understand it's a polarized time to discuss necessarily the candidate you're choosing. However, just the act of voting itself needs to happen. And that's what this country is depending on, the people, to make the decisions. So it's something for somebody to have an opinion that's different than yours, but it's a lot worse for someone to not have an opinion at all.
And can I just,
go ahead.
You also don't have to be ashamed to not know. what to do.
Mm.
So I love that you said speak to your friends about it, because that is important, right? There's some people who are just a little ashamed and they're like, well, I should know. You know, they could be in their 30s, they could be in their 40s, and they've only voted a handful of times. Or if not, they've never voted. Don't be ashamed of that.
My question for both of you is, why do you think that this topic of voting is something that is so could feel sometimes awkward or hush hush, if you will? Why do you feel as though this type of conversation isn't talked about within our communities, just amongst our friends and our peers? Why do you think that is?
Well, I could think, of course, identify as African American. I think it's because we were invited to the party late, and then when we were invited to the party, they locked the door on us and said, "Yeah, come on in," and waved to us at the window. So it's like we're talking about a system that didn't wholly invite us and incorporate us into it as we should have been as our civic duty as being citizens. So I think we still carry that weight with us when it comes to voting. So the people that are closest to us, like our family members, that weight is even stronger because it was even harder for them to actually vote. Whereas it might be easier now. In many ways, however, it's also the mental strain of our generations before us that didn't either didn't have the ability or just didn't have whatever barrier there was in their way. So I think that's the biggest thing, is that especially in Mono, and not just African Americans, but other groups in the United States, they all have had challenges with voting. So I think that's the initial issue of creating the anxiety that I can't even talk about it because it's not for me.
I think it's also due to voter mistrust as well.
Okay.
We've gone to the polls. You hear a lot now, definitely this election year, about a lot of black people turning to Republican. And they're using that as a talking point. And they're saying, well, the Democrats, what have the Democrats done for you lately? And they're sort of doing this like blood crypt thing, like they're doing this line of demarcation and this separation by political party. But it's not about the political party. It's what has that individual politician done for us lately. And what happens is that I think in a lot of cases, some of these politicians haven't done their job. So there is voter mistrust. There is, we don't trust them. So to say, okay, for a lot of voters, well, they'll say, I'm just not going to vote because I don't believe that change will happen. I don't think that anything is going to happen. I don't think that we're going to be able to fix anything. So I think that's a huge part of it
And what
too.
would you say to those voters who are blatant and just say, I don't do it? What would you say to them?
I would say hold your elected officials accountable. Pay attention to what's happening locally. I think here in Delaware, we have been blessed to have so many young, active politicians up and coming. We have Medina Anson coming up. We have Marie Pankey coming up. We have Sharia Moore, who is a former education chair for the young professionals, and she's on the ballot as well. We have young professionals, people who probably didn't run in the past, but they're committed to change. Okay, so they're there. So I'm just saying, trust the process, trust that times are changing, trust that things are going to be different, and take a chance. We will prevail.
All right. And lastly, I just want to know any final thoughts, any final words of encouragement that you'd like to leave our viewers and our audience with about the importance of voting. Elections are less than a week away. It's the final countdown. What do you have to say?
Well, the other thing I would add is that I think we do need to change our mindset about voting. I think we think of it like a sports competition where there is one winner, and if our winner doesn't win, then we're out of the game. But that's not the case. If the person that you are dying to see win doesn't win, that's okay. Still be engaged. Still hold that person that does win the election accountable. Still talk to them about the issues that matter to you, because when it comes to these elections, these people will still work for you, and that's how we can really start having lasting change. It's not going to change just on November 3rd. It's going to change November. It may change a little bit on November 3rd, but we got to keep going. November 5th, November 7th, and keep going. So keep everybody accountable, like Winona says. So just remember that we can all win.
All right. And Winona, last thoughts.
I love what Shane just said. I second that. Ditto, 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 ditto. No, it's just the truth. My advice also would be join some young professional groups. Get out into your community. Just being able to have a friend and a colleague in Shane, you become a better person. So there are resources out there that we may not be aware of. We can't do it all on our own, but if you come together with a group of like-minded individuals, it will just only make you better.
All right. Well, thank you so much, audience, for tuning in with us. Again, my name is Kaylin Pride from the Metropolitan Wilmington Urban League, and we want to just thank DETV for sponsoring this and our president, Danielle Craig, for giving us the invitation to be here today. Don't forget to get out and vote. Elections are coming soon.